So let me ask you first, this is not the first time you have been positioned in Thailand.
No, certainly not.
Okay. So how was your first impression of Thailand?
Well, my first impression of Thailand, and that's 20 years ago,
Okay.
and it's really 20 years ago. I moved to Thailand in 1998 for the first time for a period of 3.5 years, then working for an embassy of a European Union member state. Now I represent the Union as a whole. I was then, of course, a much younger diplomat. I must say that I fell in love with Thailand in those days, and I fell in love with the Thailand I got to know. It was a country of fantastic people. Going forward just then out of the so-called Tom Yum Goong crisis, the economic crisis of 1997, consolidating a democratic system, again under the so-called People's Constitution of that time. Chuan Lik Pai was the Prime Minister, Surin Pitsuwan Foreign Minister, Supachai Panchapatke was the Minister of Commerce. You had a really great team of people, and you really saw the potential of this country, the potential for the future. At the same time, I fell in love with the culture of the country and sort of the deep historical roots of Thailand. So I think that from the beginning of my relationship with the Kingdom of Thailand, my impressions have only been positive.
So it sounds like Thailand has been treating you quite well so far.
Thailand has treated me quite well so far, I have to say. Of course, now 20 years later, I'm in a different kind of a role. It's a new reality, let's put it that way. The country has become much wealthier. The country has become much more developed. Politics is perhaps a little bit more complicated at this
Of
moment
course.
than it was then. Our relationship, the EU-Thailand relationship, is more challenging. And of course the European Union is different. I was then representing a member state. If you look at the last 20 years and the depth of integration, the creation of what you'd call a common foreign and security policy for the European Union. First, a High Representative, Javier Solana, whom I worked for, but who was not yet so-called what you could really call a foreign minister of the European Union. Then the Lisbon Treaty, a common EU diplomatic service where we did have commission delegations earlier. So of course the parameters of my return are very different from where I was at that stage. But the love for the country has stayed. The warmth is very much there, and I don't mean the climate at this moment.
It's also there.
It's also there. A bit more unstable than it used to be due to global warming. But it's a country I've been following, and it's a country I have also visited between my two postings. But very well.
I understand that every time the diplomat will move to different countries, there must be some kind of warning of sensitive issues.
Yes.
What would be the sensitive things that they warn you about Thailand? Can you tell us?
Well, if you're talking about sensitive issues for a diplomat, well, I think that you can talk about sensitivities from many viewpoints. I mean, you can talk about cultural sensitivities, and there, of course, there are many.
Right.
I come from Eastern Europe, where I was ambassador in a country called the Republic of Moldova earlier. I worked, after I left Thailand, mainly on the former Soviet Union, in countries where, let's say, the communication culture was rather direct.
Okay.
And of course, and I think that I was even looking very much forward to coming back to Thailand so that I could communicate somewhat softer than I have done and still be understood. So communication, that's one of the sensitivities. But if you look at diplomatic sensitivities and where we've been, so I think that the main issue, and I think it goes without saying, is that our relationship with the kingdom since the military takeover in 2014 has been not quite straightforward. It's been a bit complicated. And now you see that we have a hope of gradual re-engagement, and a re-engagement which I'm personally very, very committed to. But everything around this was, of course, when I came, the biggest sensitivity.
Right. Can I ask you, before we get to the serious subject, can I ask you what get you into this line of work?
Oh, well, that is going to be a very... I could give you a long answer, but I think I'll give you a very short answer.
Okay.
I knew this line of work.
Okay.
I felt very comfortable with it. My grandfather was a career diplomat. My father was a senior United Nations official in basically international labor relations. My mother was a politician. So I think that my own stars were aligned in that way, that even if my parents were always saying to me that no, do your own thing. I mean, don't follow what we're doing. And, were never trying to push me to this. I don't know whether I disappointed them or what, but in the end I looked around and said, hey, I want to be a diplomat. I think this is the most fantastic profession any person can have. It's a profession which opens up a lot of possibilities, a lot of richness. It puts you in the middle of events. Of course, then you have to choose where you want to serve and what kind of work you want to have. I mean, I don't like boring postings. I like to be in places with democratic transition issues, development issues, issues where we really have important partnership questions, where diplomacy can make a difference. And I think it's that sort of knowing and then wanting to make a difference.
Right.
So there you see the diplomatic and the political background in me.
So it sounds like you always knew what you want to be. Or you were dreaming of something else as a little child.
If I was, I can't really remember it. I think I probably thought for a while that I might become a military officer. With my eyesight, that would have been a pipe dream in any case.
But that's a different kind of diplomacy.
But let me, well, that's a bit far from diplomacy, but okay. Even if some say it's a continuation of the so two sides of the same coin. But no, I think that for me it was always pretty clear what I wanted to do.
Okay. So about Thailand, when they warn you, no, I think go back to the same question, that there will be some kinds of sensitivity that they warn you about. How about what do and don't?
What do and don't? Well, I mean, I suppose that don't raise your voice and and communicate in the way you may communicate in some more conflictual societies.
Right.
That would be the biggest sensitivity, a certain amount of religious sensitivities. But these are, in a way, if I look at my profession, people have sensitivities everywhere in the world, and wherever you move from one culture to another, I suppose you have to be, I don't suppose, I know, you have to be respectful, you have to find your way around that culture, and you have to remember that you're not where you come from, but you're in somebody else's home. And this is the thing about being a diplomat, that becomes your home too. Because if I think now, when I say, even if I know I will be here for 4 years, not shorter, not longer, if I'm traveling somewhere and I say I'm going home, home does not mean Brussels, where my headquarters is. Now home means where my wife is, where my work is, where my colleagues are, and that's Bangkok.
Okay.
So of course you have to be sensitive when living in that home of yours.
Talking about Thailand, we feel that relationship of EU and Thailand is starting to get back on track. After quite a while, it has been quite, I would say, stalled. Is that the right word? I
think that's a rather good word. I'm not going to contradict you on that, and that's not just simply because I'm trying to be culturally sensitive, but it is. I think you're finding indeed a quite good term to use.
Okay.
Now, the reasons for that have been quite clear. There was a military takeover in 2014. And this was a very difficult moment for us, because if you look at Thailand's role for Europe, a few things. The relationship between Europe and Thailand, I'm not only talking about the European Union, but Europe and Thailand, is really quite an old one already. My Portuguese colleagues remind me that this year is a year when they are celebrating 500 years from the first treaty between Siam and Portugal.
And that
Portugal
is a very long
That's a very long time. Now, Portugal is a very important member state of the European Union. So our history goes back a long time. If you look at the EU's diplomatic representation, before we had European Union delegations, we had European Commission delegations. This delegation here, which then later on transformed into representing politically also the whole of the Union, this delegation was opened in 1979. Mm-hmm. So we're going nearly 40 years back. It was one of our key delegations and still is in the region. Of course, now our diplomatic representation is quite large. So for us, the role of Thailand and the importance of Thailand, our friendship with Thailand, has been beyond question. At the same time, our own history, our value systems, European values, are rather sensitive on military takeovers, let's put it that way. So we were in a rather difficult situation and have been hoping ever since 2014 that the preconditions for re-engagement would be there. Mm-hmm. Now, and my mission here is very much about re-engagement, mm-hmm. but also about taking our relationship further than it has ever been, building on this strategically important partnership. But certain things need to happen. Now, you saw that in December last year, December 2017, the 28 ministers of the European Union took a policy decision. We call it council conclusions. I mean, I know it sounds a bit jargon, but that basically means that 28 foreign ministers, under the chairmanship of our High Representative, Vice President of the Commission, Federica Mogherini, my boss, get together and they decide on a new policy line. Now, if I look at those elements, so first of all, you will see that the point of departure has not changed that much. Mm-hmm. We want to see a vibrant relationship with a very important partner, mm-hmm. who's also an important partner in ASEAN, and which, even during the time when we had rather difficult relations, worked very hard as ASEAN country coordinator for relations with the European Union to keep our relationship and the EU-ASEAN relationship on track. Mm-hmm. We're working together on sustainable development goals. We're working together on a number of other things. But to get our bilateral relationship going forward, certain things have happened. While we're still concerned over human rights issues, democracy issues, and that will not change, mm-hmm. we took note of the fact that a new constitution was promulgated in early 2017. You had the referendum in 2016. There was an announcement, including with a date, of elections, mm-hmm. or a perspective for elections later on this year. And we saw that there was a movement to moving civilian cases away from military courts to civilian courts or cases involving civilians. And while we will keep our relationship with Thailand under review based on basically where we are going on democracy, human rights, and others, we saw that the elements were there that, okay, we're moving on the roadmap mm-hmm. in the right direction. So we restored political level contacts at all levels. And we announced that because we need these contacts. And I was very happy attending meetings in Brussels now in the beginning of March, on the 5th of March, 6th of March, between Foreign Minister Don and Federica Mogherini, our High Representative, Commissioner for Development, Neven Mimica, and our Commissioner for the Environment, Maritime Affairs and Fisheries, Carmelo Vella. So you saw that our political level dialogue is going back on track. And then, of course, we have also now announced that we would be moving towards a better discussion. I met the Minister of Commerce just recently on the preconditions, the possibilities of restarting our negotiations on a free trade area.
I was going to ask you that.
Yes. But let me underline that the decision of the EU Council has not changed. Negotiations, real negotiations, can only start with or we will only formally launch negotiations with an elected government once the parliamentary elections are done. But that doesn't mean that we can't talk about the scope. We had a few rounds of negotiations before the military takeover. That's 4 years ago. We will need to look where we are at this moment before we start negotiating.
So let's say, because free trade agreement between Thailand and EU has been such a big topic several years back after
and it will be a big topic again,
yes.
I hope, I wish, I
so
pray.
It will be back on the table.
I think it's very important that it will be back on the table, and if you look at the language of the Council conclusions, where the ministers invite the European Commission to talk to Thailand about the relaunch of negotiations, while underlining when the negotiations can be relaunched, i.e. with an elected government after the elections. So yes, you see that this is a very important issue on the table.
So just to make people understand how important it is to have free trade agreement between EU and Thailand.
Okay, let's look at some figures, or not exact figures because I'm not good at numbers, but I can put it importance.
Right.
The European Union is Thailand's third largest trading partner after China and Japan, or Japan and China. I cannot remember exactly which order that's in. We are the third largest source of foreign direct investment, again after the same, which I mentioned, and the second destination for Thai investment abroad. The European Union is a market of 500 million rather wealthy people.
True.
And it is also what I always underline with the wealth. It is a market where the income distribution between the poor and the rich is approximately among the most equal, which means that it's a market which really is attractive. Now, I'm a great believer in free trade. And I know, and in a rules-based international order also based on free trade. Now, I believe that everybody benefits from it. For Thailand, Thailand will be able to export more into, and I'm not saying the negotiations are going to be that easy. I mean, there are all kinds of issues, but Thailand will be able to export more into this enormously important market. Now you will see that the price of import goods from the EU, for instance, in Thailand is very, very high.
Yes.
Compared to any countries in the region.
Yes.
So for the Thai consumer, a free trade area will mean lower prices for those goods. It will mean more trade in both directions. It will mean a win-win solution, and it means a closeness of our economies. So I think that there is a lot to benefit. And as such, as said, the European Union is really basically in the forefront of believing in an open global economic order.
Let's move to the subject of immigration.
Yes, let's.
I know the EU has pretty wide open immigration policy, but some certain country in EU, the citizens starting to be not too happy with how open the country is, and some countries starting to talk about close the border and things like that. So what is the policy as a whole?
I think that, I mean, the policy has not changed. There are elements. First of all, let's look at the fact that Europe, as such, I think there are fears. There are fears which may not, in fact, really have anything to do that much with immigration. Some of it has to do with immigration, but of how equally society will function and so on and so forth. I mean, we have all come to a more challenging period in life. So I mean that there is the sort of myth or feeling that immigrants take away from your well-being, which I'm not, by the way, at all convinced is the case. If you look at Europe, we have an aging population, not very big population growth. You will in fact need new workforce. So immigration, migration as such is a positive. Now, of course, what has been noticeable is that you have had this very big exponential growth of migration due to instability, due to both refugees but also economic migrants. The situation in the southern Mediterranean has changed quite dramatically, and the inflows have been quite dramatic. And we have tried to find solutions both in helping those member states most affected, Greece, Italy, in managing this and finding really solutions based on European solidarity. And I'd say that those efforts have been relatively successful.
Okay.
In addition, of course, we have we need to look at migration also in terms of addressing the root causes of migration. That means working not only in Europe, but working in those countries from where migrants are leaving to try to build preconditions. Where you have conflict zones, others, it is difficult, I have to say. In addition, we also are trying, and this is sort of the military aspect of what we're doing, we have a common European defense policy sort of mission in the Mediterranean called the EU Naval Force Mediterranean or Operation Sophia, which has been acting very actively, and that's under, in a way, the command of the High Representative, command of Madame Mogherini, where we have been both saving lives of migrants who've been stranded in the Mediterranean, but also, and chiefly, and this is cracking down on smuggling and smugglers. And I think over 500 vessels with smugglers have been apprehended and cracked down on. People's lives have been saved. So I mean, we're going now very much in a full chain of starting from root causes to fighting smuggling, to trying to get resources where migrants are going, to looking at registration of settlement. And here, this, I know it's a contentious issue, but building towards European solidarity on these issues. Now, of course, new things and things which happen, they build a lot of fears in people's minds. And I think there are a lot of myths as well. There are a lot of myths as well on security issues.
I was going to ask you, how would EU take care of anti-immigrant sentiment?
We are democracies. And I think the only way we can really take care of that is to try to manage and to show that the risks for our societies are not really there. That these are things which can be addressed through the right policies and through the right responses. You need more discussion. I think you sometimes need empathy for everybody's views, but we have, and you have to sometimes also remember that Europe's own history has had questions of migration, questions of resettlement. We've had our own internal refugees. Even after the Second World War, we've had refugees after the Balkan Wars and so on. We have been dealing with these kind of issues for a long time. But we need to find those policies which work for everybody. And as I said, as such, Europe will need more workforce and Europe will need more migrants. So it's more really a matter of managing and doing that in a way showing solidarity, but also to have that debate and discussion in society and try to have it in an as respectful manner as possible.
Can I ask you, what is the European Union policy on Russia?
Well, that is a policy I know relatively well because I mentioned to you that I had been working in the former Soviet Union, and way back when I moved from Thailand to Ukraine. From Ukraine I moved to Brussels, where I was then advising our leadership precisely on Eastern Europe.
So you have special relationship.
So I have a special part there. I think there's a lot of sadness in that relationship because we don't anymore, we considered Russia a strategic partner. for a very long time. And I think we wanted to create, both with sort of a dynamic for a common relationship, common accord, we wanted to talk about our common neighborhood, we wanted to find win-win solutions against the sort of old 19th century geopolitical narrative, but really to support our relations and the development of prosperity in our common neighborhood. But one thing was absolutely clear, and that is very much in the European DNA, that we will always stand up for the right of countries to choose their own way, their own direction, and so on. And of course, after 2013, 2014, after the illegal annexation of Crimea, and Ukrainian Crimea is an area which I know very well. I visited many times when it was before the annexation. The support for separatist elements in the Donbass and in the Luhansk Oblast in Ukraine, it was of course clear that business could not, that our strategic partnership was not really holding, and we did take measures, including cancelling summit-level meetings between the European Union and Russia, with targeted sanctions or sort of restrictive measures, asset freezes, others against those implicated, with attention so that with measures against business companies and others who would be trading or working in Crimea. But at the same time, we are supporting also the Minsk process, and we are supporting finding negotiated ways out, but within the parameters of respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and that includes Crimea.
Talking about the sanction, has EU achieved its goal starting the sanctions several years back?
Well, I would say that Crimea is still annexed illegally. Destabilization in Ukraine's east continues. I think, but it is quite clear that not responding is not an option.
Right.
And we are continuing, in addition to sanctions, diplomatic efforts, which I mentioned. But let me underline, the European Union will and cannot accept an illegal annexation of the territory of another country. That's absolutely out of the question.
Okay. Let's move on to the last subject today, about North Korea.
North Korea? Okay.
North Korea. Yes. What is the overall policy of European Union on North Korea?
Well, we have been, I think all of us, very strongly pushing for a full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, and we have been extremely concerned over the developments which could lead to North Korea having nuclear weapons. We have a sanctions regime in line with the United Nations Security Council decisions on North Korea, and let's be honest, or let's be clear, there is no other country in the world against which the EU sanction regime is quite so stringent. Now, sanctions are not a goal in themselves, and this is the same whether it's towards Russia or North Korea. Sanctions are not a goal in themselves. They are there to enable change. Now, we hope that political processes could be found where we could see a verifiable denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And we look forward, and High Representative Mogherini will be receiving next week the Korean foreign minister together with the EU foreign ministers in Brussels. So we very much look forward, on Monday in fact, so we very much look forward to hearing where our Korean partners see that they are, and very much look forward to this prospect, which has now started over the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, leading to a inter-Korean summit between the president of South Korea and the North Korean leader. we also, of course, take note of the possible openness of a summit-level meeting between North Korea and the United States, and of course hope that this could be one more step towards getting to that overall goal.
I was going to ask, what is your thought about the summit between the U.S. leader and the North Korea leader? What do you hope comes out?
Well, as I said, we hope that it would be an opportunity to work towards peace and towards the goal of a verifiably denuclearized Korean Peninsula.
If come out of that meeting and U.S. ask EU to impose even stricter sanction measure, would EU be in on it?
Well, let me just answer in that way, that for us it is clear that we take our own decisions, and we do so in coordination with our partners. And as I already said, our sanctions regime against North Korea is really the strictest we have against any country at this moment. I'm not going to start sort of speculating on what if at a certain stage we review our policies, and as said, we are working in contact with our partners globally, the United States being a traditional, our transatlantic partnership is, even with an occasional bump and so on, but it is a partnership which is which is really primordially important for us. But we will take our decisions in consultations with others, but very independently, and of course, very often under the umbrella of the United Nations. I mean, we do believe in effective multilateralism, and we will continue to do so.
Okay, thank you very much for your time today. That's all the questions I have for you.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
โอเค ยาวกี่นาทีอะคะ